The sound hit me before I even understood what it was, a scream slicing through the cold night air, raw enough to freeze my breath mid-chest. I've heard fear before, but never like this. Never from a child running full speed into the beams of my headlights, arms flailing, voice cracking as he yelled the words that could rip a man's soul clean open. He took my mom, and in that single moment, as he stumbled into the middle of the road with tears shining against the asphalt, I felt the world tilt beneath my boots. Tell me, what would you have done if that cry was aimed at you? The rig hissed as I slammed the brakes, tires screaming against the pavement, the whole cab shaking like the night itself was trying to wake me up. Diesel fumes wrapped around me when I jumped down from the truck, my boots hitting the ground hard enough to echo through the empty stretch of highway. The wind cut across my face, sharp as broken glass, carrying the faint smell of burnt rubber and winter air. The boy stood a few feet ahead, hunched, gasping, looking over his shoulder as if the darkness was about to grow hands and drag him back. He couldn't have been more than 12, maybe 13. Skinny, dirty, clothes torn at the sleeve. His chest heaved like he'd been running for miles. I moved slowly toward him, hands out, trying not to scare him more than the night already had. His eyes, wild, terrified, locked onto mine. "Please," he whispered, voice shaking so badly it barely held together. "You gotta help me." He took her. He took my mom. The words hit hard, like a fist under the ribs, knocking the air out of me. Before I could speak, he grabbed the front of my jacket with both hands, fingers freezing cold, gripping like he was drowning, and I was the last thing keeping him above water. His breath came out in white bursts, each one sharper than the last. That kind of fear doesn't come from being lost. It comes from being hunted. The highway behind him was pitch black. No lights, no cars, no sound except the low hum of my idling engine and the pounding of his small, desperate heart, trying to outrun something terrible. "Tell me what happened," I said, lowering my voice. He shook his head violently, eyes darting toward the stretch of road he'd come from. "He'll see us," he choked out. "He'll find us. He always finds us." The way he said it, quiet, broken, certain, sent a chill crawling down my spine. Not the cold kind, the kind that warns you the night isn't done testing you yet. And that's when I realized something that twisted deep in my gut. Whatever he was running from wasn't far behind, and whatever had taken his mother wasn't finished yet. The boy's grip tightened. "Please don't leave me," he whispered. The headlights glowed behind him, casting his trembling silhouette long across the asphalt, and I knew, before the next breath even left my chest, that my life wouldn't be the same after this night. The boy kept shivering in my arms as I carried him toward the shoulder of the road, his breath hitting my jacket in sharp, panicked bursts. The highway behind us stretched out like a dark river, empty, silent, waiting. I could still feel the tremble in his fingers, the kind that comes from cold, fear, and something far worse than either. His voice was barely a thread when he tried to speak again, cracking under the weight of whatever he'd seen. I set him down gently beside my front tire, crouching low so I could meet his eyes. The headlights washed over him, revealing just how young he really was. Maybe 9, maybe 10, cheeks red from crying, hair messy from running, a bruise forming along his jaw. "Tell me what happened," I said softly. "Tell me who took her." He tried, he really did, but the words tangled in his throat. His body shook too hard. His fear was louder than his voice. Then he jerked his head toward the dark field across the road, eyes widening, pupils sharp with terror. I followed his gaze. Nothing moved. No headlights, no silhouettes, no sound except the wind brushing against the weeds. But the way he stared, it felt like something was out there, watching, waiting, breathing right along with the night. My chest tightened. Kids don't look at darkness like that unless the darkness has already looked back at them. I reached out and rested a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. He gripped my sleeve again, fingers cold, small, desperate. "Do you know which way he went?" I asked. He swallowed hard, pointing toward the abandoned service road that cut behind the tree line. "He dragged her that way," he whispered. "He said if I screamed, he'd come back for me too." His voice broke completely after that, dissolving into a sound no child should ever have to make. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, something sharp, cold, not quite right. I'd been on the road long enough to know when the night is normal and when the night is warning you. This night was warning me, and every instinct I had told me that whoever took that boy's mother wasn't far, the kind of not far that makes your back straighten and your pulse slow down to something cold and steady. I turned back to him. "Listen to me," I said. "You're not alone anymore. You're with me, and I'm not letting anything happen to you, or to your mom. Not tonight." His breathing slowed just a little, just enough for hope to slip through the cracks of his fear. But the road in front of us, the one disappearing into the trees, felt like it was holding its breath. Whatever waited in that darkness, I knew one thing for sure. I was going after it. The boy's breathing hitched as I moved closer, and in the dim glow of my headlights I finally saw the truth written across his face. Terror carved so deep it looked permanent. His small hands trembled as he clutched the edge of my jacket, like a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved to hold. "He took my mom," he repeated, quieter this time, as if saying it out loud made the world more dangerous. The weight of those words pressed against my chest, sharp and cold. Out here on the asphalt, under a sky empty enough to swallow a scream whole, a child shouldn't have been carrying that kind of fear. Not alone. I knelt in front of him, the gravel biting into my knees, and tried to meet his gaze without forcing it. His eyes flicked upward, wide and glassy, searching my face for something, strength maybe, or certainty, or a promise I hadn't spoken yet. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated, like offering it might put both of us at risk. "Caleb," he whispered. His voice cracked and he wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing dirt across his cheek. Caleb, a name too small to carry the kind of nightmare he was running from. The night air tightened around us, colder, heavier. In the distance, the wind dragged something metallic across the pavement. Maybe a loose sign, maybe something else. Caleb flinched so violently it was like a current surged through him. He pressed both hands over his ears, shaking. "He's coming," he whispered. He always finds us." The desperation in his voice wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet, exhausted kind born from experience, from repetition, from running too many times and losing every one of them until tonight. I eased a hand onto his shoulder, slow and steady, letting him feel the warmth, the grounding. His thin body trembled beneath my palm. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low. "You're not alone anymore. Whoever took your mom, I'm not letting him get to you." Caleb swallowed hard, the promise hitting him like a shock. He shook his head in disbelief, tears gathering again. "You don't know him," he whispered. "You don't know what he does when he gets angry." The words curled into the dark like smoke from a burning memory. A truck passed on the highway far beyond the lot, its distant hum vibrating through the cold air. The sound should have been comforting. Trucks meant life, motion, people, but Caleb only curled in tighter, eyes scanning the shadows as if every shape hid a threat. I followed his gaze and saw nothing but the empty silhouette of the station, the pale glow of a broken streetlight and the endless stretch of night. But fear like his didn't need proof. It had roots deeper than logic. And if he said someone had taken his mother, someone had. I stood slowly and opened the passenger door of my rig. Warm air drifted out, brushing against Caleb's cold skin. He stared at the open cab like it was a question he didn't know how to answer. "Come on," I said softly. "You're safe in here." He hesitated, just one heartbeat, one look over his shoulder at the shadows, and then he climbed in, small and shivering but trying to be brave. I shut the door gently, sealing him in the steel shelter of the truck. For the first time since he ran into the road, he let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like relief. The boy's breaths were sharp and uneven as I carried him toward the cab. His fingers locked around my shirt like he thought the world would rip him away if he loosened his grip. The freezing wind cut across the asphalt, carrying dust, diesel, and the lingering echo of his scream. The road behind us was swallowed in darkness, but his eyes never stopped searching it, like he expected a shadow to break free at any moment. When we reached the steps of my truck, he finally whispered, "Please don't let him take me," and the way his voice cracked felt like someone dragging a blade across my chest. Inside the cab, the faint glow of the dashboard painted his face in shaky blue light. He curled into the corner of the seat, knees pulled tight, shaking so hard the fabric of the seat vibrated beneath him. I didn't start the engine, not yet. My instincts were screaming at me to scan the lot, to check every angle, to make sure whatever he was running from wasn't already watching us. I pressed my hand gently to his shoulder. "Who took your mom?" His eyes flicked up, wet and terrified. "His name is Calvin," he whispered. "He said she owed him. He said if she couldn't pay, he'd take me instead." The cab went quiet, too quiet. Even the ticking of the cooling engine felt distant, muffled by the weight of his words. I'd heard a lot of things on the road, but nothing hits harder than a kid crying out for a mother he thinks he's losing. He kept shaking his head like the memories were too heavy to hold still. "He put her in his truck," the boy said. "He drove off. I tried to grab her hand, but..." His voice broke, collapsing into a sob he tried to swallow down. I leaned closer, steadying him. "You did the right thing running toward the lights," I said. "You're not alone now." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the metal of the trailer, and the boy froze instantly, breath hitching like a hunted animal sensing a predator nearby. I scanned the mirrors again, nothing but the vast, empty stretch of darkness hugging the truck stop. But quiet like that doesn't happen naturally. Quiet like that means something else is listening, something else is moving. I reached across the cab and locked the doors. The heavy click echoing through the darkness like a warning shot fired into the night. Another sound followed, a distant engine rumbling over broken pavement, slow and heavy. The boy's head snapped toward the window, panic flooding his face. "That's him," he whispered. "That's his truck." My heart tightened as headlights appeared far down the road, moving like a predator stalking its victim. I placed a steady hand on the boy's back, grounding him as the trembling grew sharper. Outside, the night held its breath, and the approaching lights drew closer, brighter, more certain with every second. "Stay down," I said gently. "Whatever happens next, you're safe with me." The kid's breathing was so uneven it sounded like it might shatter in the air between us. I crouched beside him, trying to anchor him back into his body before the panic swallowed him whole. "Lucas," I said softly, repeating his name until his eyes flicked toward mine. "I need you to tell me everything. Every detail helps me save your mom." He wiped his face with a shaking sleeve, forcing himself to breathe, even if every inhale trembled with fear. He pointed toward the darkness behind the abandoned gas station. "They went that way," he whispered. "He shoved her into some kind of old storage building. She screamed for me to run. She told me not to look back." His voice cracked, guilt bleeding through every word. "But I did look back, and he saw me." His whole body flinched at the memory, like the man's shadow still chased him, still stretched across the pavement toward him. I looked where he pointed. The area was dead silent, too silent, the kind of silence that swallows sound instead of carrying it. A single broken light flickered above a long-forgotten service road leading into the woods. No cars, no movement, but the cold in the air shifted, carrying something else with it, the sense that someone out there was waiting, watching for the boy to make a mistake. Lucas grabbed my sleeve again, his fingers digging into the fabric like they were holding on to life itself. "Please don't let him take her," he whispered. He said he'd make sure I never saw her again." The fear in his voice wasn't the fear of a child imagining monsters. It was the fear of someone who'd already met one, someone who knew exactly what that monster was capable of. I placed my hand on his shoulder and steadied him. "Listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm, grounded. "Your mom fought to get you away. She bought you time. Now it's my turn." His eyes widened, hope and terror twisting together. "But you need to stay behind me, no matter what happens. No running toward me. No calling out. You stay hidden until I bring her back." He nodded, swallowing hard, terrified but holding on. The night pressed close around us as I stood and scanned the road again. My boots crunched against the gravel as I took a step toward the service road, and Lucas instinctively moved with me until I held up a hand. "Stay in the cab," I told him. "Lock the doors. Keep the interior lights off." He hesitated, but then he climbed in, shutting the door softly. And as the engine ticked beneath the cold night air, I walked alone toward the shadows where his mother had disappeared. The man took another step toward the ditch, and instinct slammed into me so hard it rooted my boots into the ground. Something inside me, something older than anger, older than fear, whispered that if I didn't move now, this boy's life would disappear into the dark, like it had never existed. I sprinted toward him, gravel exploding under my steps. The boy's voice trembled as he sobbed against the frozen earth, hands covering his head as if bracing for a blow he'd already lived through too many times. I reached him and knelt, the cold biting straight through my jeans as I placed a hand on his shoulder. He jerked violently, thinking it was the man, thinking he'd been caught, thinking this was the moment everything ended. "Evan," I said softly, steady, letting my voice cut through the panic flooding his body. "It's me. You're safe." His breathing hitched, rapid and uneven, like he wasn't sure whether to trust his lungs or trust me. His fingers uncurled slowly from his head, revealing eyes drenched in terror that had been growing inside him for far too long. I pulled him gently into my arms and he collapsed against my chest, shaking so hard I could feel every tremor echo through my ribs. The night wrapped around us like a living thing, silent, cold, watching. Evan tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. He said she was gone," he stammered. "He said I'd never see her again." His small hands clenched the fabric of my jacket like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. I held him tighter, grounding him while my mind raced through every shadow, every noise, every flicker of danger. Behind us, a car engine turned over, slowly, ominously, like the night itself was inhaling. Evan tensed instantly, body locking up in my arms. He turned his head just enough to look over my shoulder, and the way his face drained of color told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had taken his mother, whatever had chased him onto the highway, whatever was stalking the edges of this dark stretch of road, it wasn't done. Not yet. I stood up with Evan clinging to me, his breath stuttering against my shoulder. The engine revved again, headlights flickering to life through the trees like the eyes of something waking up. The beam swept across the ditch, across the weeds, across us. Slow, lingering, searching. Evan buried his face against me, whispering the same words he had cried into the road just minutes before. "Don't let him find me. Please, please don't let him find me." I turned my body to shield him, keeping my eyes locked on the glow cutting through the darkness. Everything inside me sharpened into one single promise. One I spoke aloud, low and certain, letting it anchor itself into the frozen night. "He won't touch you, not while I'm standing." And as the headlights stopped moving, as the engine idled with a predator's patience, as the cold wind carried a presence I couldn't yet see, I realized something that pulled every nerve in my body tight. This night was far from over, and whatever was coming, it was coming for both of us. The hallway outside that tiny office felt like a tunnel tightening around me, every step echoing with the weight of what Jonah had confessed. The sheriff walking beside me didn't say much, but he kept glancing at the boy like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't belong to any normal night. Jonah kept close to my side, his breaths short, uneven, as if the air itself was thinner here. I pushed the door open, and inside, an officer spread out some blankets on a bench, motioning Jonah to sit. He thanked her quietly, voice trembling but steady enough to show he wasn't the same kid who had run into the road an hour ago. I stayed standing, leaning against the far wall, letting Jonah have the space he needed while still making sure he knew I was there. The sheriff finally spoke, his tone softer than before. He told Jonah they'd already sent out units, that every available patrol car was combing the county roads and back highways looking for the man who'd taken his mother. Jonah nodded, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. It shifted into something sharper, deeper. "He won't let her go," he whispered. "He never does." The sheriff's jaw tightened at that, like he'd just been handed a truth he wished wasn't real. Cold wind seeped through the cracks of the old station, carrying the faint buzz of radios outside. Jonah shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. I crossed the room, knelt beside him, and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," I told him. His eyes lifted to mine, tired, scared, but fighting to believe me. He swallowed hard and whispered that his mother had tried to leave weeks ago but never got far, not with a man who checked her phone, followed her to work, waited outside every place she went. The sheriff listened to every word, the muscles in his face tightening with each new detail. A young deputy rushed in with an update. Someone had spotted a dark pickup speeding down a service road near the old sawmill, exactly the direction Jonah had pointed on the map. The sheriff turned to us, urgency burning in his eyes. Jonah froze, breath catching, fingers digging into the fabric of the blanket. "That's him," he said. "He uses that road when he wants to hide." His voice cracked. "He'll hurt her if he thinks she told anyone." The words punched something deep in my chest, and I stood immediately, ready for whatever came next. Before leaving the room, I looked Jonah in the eyes and promised him that I wouldn't let the night end the way his fear imagined it would. He nodded slowly, gripping my sleeve one last time before letting go, as if releasing the last thread of the nightmare he'd been trapped in. Then the sheriff called my name sharply, and I followed him out into the cold hallway, boots echoing against the tile, every step carrying the weight of the life still hanging in the dark. The cruiser rolled to a stop, its headlights slicing through the dark like blades. Officer Ramirez stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of calm you only see in men who've walked into chaos more times than they can count. Behind him, Officer Hale scanned the lot with a hand resting on her holster. I lifted my palm slightly so they'd know the threat wasn't me. The boy stayed behind my leg, gripping my jacket, shaking so hard I could feel it through the fabric. Ramirez's eyes landed on the man instantly. The panic, the sweat, the bite marks of guilt etched into his expression. "Sir, don't move," he said, voice steady. The man raised his hands, but his jaw tightened, eyes darting toward the boy like he was still trying to pull him back with a stare alone. Hale approached Emily gently, assessing her injuries, whispering to her in a soft, practiced tone, meant for victims who'd spent too long in silence. The boy stepped out just enough for the officers to see him. His face was pale, eyes swollen, lips trembling with every breath. Ramirez crouched down, lowering himself to the boy's level. "You're safe," he said. "No one's touching you tonight." For the first time since he'd run in front of my truck, the boy's grip loosened. Not completely, just enough to show that hope had finally cracked through the fear. The man tried to speak, tried to turn the story back into his own version, but the moment he took a single step forward, Hale's voice cut through the cold air. "Don't." The authority in that one word made him freeze. Ramirez stood, jaw tightening as he looked at me. I told him everything, the screams, the highway, the chase, the knife, the threats. Ramirez didn't interrupt, didn't blink. He just listened like a man building a case brick by brick. When I finished, he walked over to the man, cuffs already in his hand. "You're done," Ramirez said. The man tried to twist away, but it didn't matter. Hale grabbed his arm, slammed him against the side of the cruiser, and locked the cuffs around his wrists with a click that felt like justice finally taking its first breath of the night. The man didn't shout this time, didn't fight. He just stared at the boy, defeated but still poisoned with that twisted need to control. The boy stepped behind me again, half hiding, half watching. He needed to see it. The moment the nightmare ended, Ramirez opened the cruiser door, pushed the man inside, and shut it hard. The echo rippled through the truck stop like the closing of a chapter no one should ever have been forced to read. The boy leaned into my side, breath shaky, voice barely a whisper. "Is it really over?" he asked. I rested a hand on his back, steadying him with the truth he deserved. "Yeah," I said softly. "Tonight, it really is." The officers moved into the motel hallway with the kind of practiced precision that only comes from years of seeing the worst of humanity up close. Their boots echoed off the walls, cutting through the tension like steady drum beats. I followed a few steps behind, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give them room to work. Miguel's breathing grew heavier as we walked. He wasn't shaking anymore. He was bracing himself for whatever version of his mother he was about to find. The fear in his eyes wasn't for himself, it was for her. When we reached the room marked 14, the hallway fell into a suffocating stillness. One of the officers pressed his ear to the door, listening, body stiffening at whatever sound murmured on the other side. The other motioned for me to take Miguel back a step, but the boy refused to move. "I need to be here," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of emotion he didn't know how to control. I rested a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone," I murmured. "Not anymore." The officer knocked once, firmly, announcing themselves. Silence stretched out on the other side of the door, thick and unnatural, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then came the softest noise, a choked whimper, barely audible, but enough to twist Miguel's entire body toward the sound. The officers exchanged a glance, then moved. The door splintered under one powerful kick, crashing inward. A sickening smell rushed out, fear, stale air, and something metallic that made my teeth clench. Inside, the room looked like a cage torn apart. A chair knocked over, sheets ripped, a lamp shattered, and in the far corner, illuminated by the harsh beam of a flashlight, was a woman curled against the wall, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her pieces together. Her face was bruised, swollen in places that made my stomach turn, but when she lifted her eyes and saw Miguel standing behind the officers, something broke inside her. Pain, relief, disbelief, all at once. Miguel didn't wait for permission. He ran to her, stumbling across the room and collapsing into her arms with a sob so raw it sliced through every other sound. She held him with trembling hands that tried to be strong but couldn't stop shaking. "I thought I lost you," she whispered, voice shredded from crying and fear. He buried his face in her shoulder, gripping her like someone who'd finally reached land after drowning in the dark. Watching them, I felt the weight of the night settle deeper into my chest, heavy, painful, but somehow necessary. The officers checked the room for threats, but the man who had taken her was gone, fled, vanished into the night like a coward running from his own consequences. The female officer crouched beside Miguel's mother, speaking softly, reassuring her that she was safe now, that the nightmare was over. But even as the words filled the air, I knew the truth. Nightmares don't end in a single moment. They fade slowly. They fade with help. They fade when someone finally decides to stay, to fight, to stand between them and the darkness. And tonight, that had been my job. When the officers finally took the man away, the night exhaled like it had been holding its breath for too long. The flashing lights faded down the empty highway, leaving only the hum of distant engines and the cold wind sweeping across the asphalt. I stood there beside my truck watching the darkness settle again, but this time it felt different. Not threatening, not waiting, just quiet. Emily sat inside the patrol car wrapped in a blanket, staring at her hands like she was trying to understand how they were still hers. The boy leaned his head on her shoulder, exhausted but safe. Safe because, for once, the road had put someone in their path who refused to keep driving. I walked closer as the officer opened the door for her. She stepped out slowly, still limping, still bruised, but standing on her own legs. The boy followed, gripping her sleeve like he was afraid the world might try to take her again. She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. It wasn't the look people give a hero. It was the look someone gives a stranger who showed up exactly when the universe went dark. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. I shook my head gently. "You don't have to. Some moments in life don't ask for repayment. They just ask you to carry them forward." She placed a hand on her son's shoulder, pulling him close. "You saved us," she said, tears forming again. But these were different. Not fear, release. The kind that only comes after surviving something that should have ended you. The officer guided them toward the back seat again, promising they would take her to a safe place, promising she would not be alone tonight. I watched them settle in, the boy giving me one last look, wide-eyed, tired, but filled with something he didn't have when I first saw him on the road, hope. As the car pulled away, I stood there in the glow of my truck's headlights, letting the moment sink into every corner of my mind. Nights like this don't leave you unchanged. They carve themselves into your chest, into your bones, into every mile you drive afterward. I walked back to my rig slowly, the cold biting harder now that the adrenaline had faded. The door creaked as I opened it, the familiar smell of diesel and worn leather wrapping around me like a reminder of who I was before tonight, and who I had become because of it. I climbed into the seat and rested my hands on the wheel, the engine rumbling beneath me in a steady, comforting rhythm. Out on the road, we see things that most people never imagine. We hear cries that disappear into the wind. We witness the kinds of moments that split a person's life into before and after, and sometimes, without warning, we become the only line between someone's nightmare and their second chance. That responsibility is heavy, but it's a weight I've learned to carry. The highway stretched ahead of me, an endless ribbon disappearing into the darkness. Somewhere out there, another life was unfolding, another storm was brewing, another soul was praying that someone would stop at the right time, hear the right words, step out of the cab when it mattered most. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air seep into my lungs, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "If you're out there," I murmured to the empty cab, "hold on, someone will show up. Maybe it'll be me." I eased the truck back into gear, the tires rolling slowly onto the highway until the world became nothing but moving shadows and distant lights. If you stayed with me through this story, then you already know why voices like Emily's matter, why a boy's cry on the road can change everything, why we don't look away when the night reveals its darkest corners. If this touched you, even for a moment, leave a like. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And subscribe, because the road ahead is long, and there are more lives, more nights, more truths waiting out there in the dark. Climb in. We've still got miles to go.